first point to keep in mind is that in many cases the artillery that was fired by us did not land on very much. Let me describe the conditions on the morning of the 26th, because they're very strange. First of all, remember that as Saddam's forces began to retreat from Kuwait, they set the oil derricks on fire, so that you had these great black clouds of smoke that had completely filled the skies. In the midst of all of this, we were in a rainstorm. It had begun raining in the previous few days. This was not unusual for February in Iraq at that time of year, and it was cold by Iraq standards. It was usually in about the 40s, maybe during the day, 50 degrees. But you have to understand, in a desert where it goes up to 120 degrees, that's actually considered very cold. And in the midst of all of this, you get a sandstorm. And the sandstorm was initially ferocious. So the visibility was terrible on the 26th when we were finally sent into action and ordered forward to find and fix this so-called Republican Guard Corps. And in the midst of all of this, you have the regimental commander and General Franks, the chain of command above us, sitting in front of radar screens, looking at this joint targeting radar system that the Air Force provides from a Boeing 707 flying overhead, trying to sort out in the midst of this sandstorm, rainstorm, and smoke-filled sky what is enemy and what is not. And it depends on whether or not the target moves, if you can identify it at all, to actually note it, see it, and as a result, there was a tendency to see lots of things that in one sweep were there, and then suddenly with the next sweep were gone. So we ended up moving through this with a visibility at times as modest as perhaps 50 meters. Then finally it began to lift, fortunately, at about the time that we finally got close enough to attack. But the interesting part was that on the 26th, there was no intention to let us close with and destroy the enemy. The idea was that we would be brought up to some point close to the enemy, stop, and then once again direct artillery and airstrikes against the enemy. All of this in the terrible weather that I just outlined.
Right.
It didn't work out that way.
1,618 hours, according to your book, Doug. Cougar attacks east toward 70 Easting. That's a position on the map. You're attacking positions of T-72s and 13 EMPs, and Ghost Troop to the left and Eagle Troop to the right, and you just go ahead and drive through a minefield. Is that right, Colonel?
Oh, I'm afraid so. It's a little embarrassing, but yes, I breached a minefield the hard way.
Now, the Iraqis were ready to fight the Russians, or they were ready to fight someone who had dismounted infantry around their battle tanks.
Well, I think the interesting part here is, as we discovered later, especially when we began talking to the captured Republican Guards, is that their principal experience of war was against Iran. And what they had seen the Iranians do was to mass large numbers of dismounted infantrymen and have them follow tanks into battle. And that's what they expected that we would do. In other words, their expectations were really geared to the Iranian experience. The other point is that the force that we encounter on the 26th is at 100% strength. And they have equipment that, for the most part, is in pretty good shape. The reason for this is that they managed to escape the destruction of the airstrikes. That the Republican Guard itself was reduced, we think, to about 85% of its original strength. But, of course, the rear guard that is set in place to defend is at 100%. It has virtually everything that it needs. Fortunately for us, there were three things in our favor. The first, of course, was the weather. The weather protected us insofar as that we advanced for about 12 miles through this extremely poor weather without really being detected by the enemy. The second part was that the enemy was not looking for us. We came out of the open desert, and there was a road that ran across the front of the defending Iraqis, and they were focused on the road, not us, which was helpful because they had to reorient their guns towards us, and frankly, it took them too long in most cases to do that to really bring us under effective fire. And then the third thing I would just argue, and I think this is very important to keep in mind, is the superiority of our equipment and the superiority of our troops. Vastly better trained, better led than anything we faced.
Douglas Macgregor's book, Warriors Rage, the Great Tank Battle of 73 Easting. When we come back, I want to ask the Colonel why he didn't go to Baghdad the next day. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. I'm continuing with Douglas Macgregor, Colonel, retired United States Army. Warrior's Rage is the book. Great Tank Battle of 73 Easting. The Iraqi Republican Guard rear guard is destroyed by 2nd Cavalry, by Cougar, by Eagle and Ghost. Well, the Ghost Troop, all of it. And now the captured Iraqi major sits there with Doug Macgregor and his cadre and tells you what, Doug?
Well, this was actually the brigade commander who'd fought the Iranians for 7 years. He turned to me and he said, "You must go to Baghdad and end this." And I looked at him rather strangely. He said, "You must save Iraq. You must rid us of this man, Saddam Hussein. He kills everyone. He killed our best generals. You must get rid of him."
The astonishment you felt, and you write it in your book, I still hear all the time, Doug. And you document how everyone in the immediate area, up and down the command, was astonished that you were ordered, after all those remarks by Colin Powell and by Schwarzkopf, astonished to stop on the 28th, allow the Republican Guard to scoot away, keeping most of its equipment, allow Saddam Hussein to continue into power. Did everybody on the battlefield puzzle about that, Doug?
I think there were a lot of us, certainly in Cougar Squadron, that wondered about it. We had lost one good man, Sergeant Muller, a very fine young man, and we'd lost the one Bradley fighting vehicle that had been destroyed by enemy fire. But otherwise, the rest of the formation was intact, and we really felt that we, so to say, had the bit between our teeth, and we were ready to rush forward and effectively complete the job, go to the Euphrates River, cut off the rest of the Republican Guard, and then ultimately we expected we'd be told to cross the river and go to Baghdad to ensure this man Saddam Hussein and his inner circle were out of business.
You make a historical reference about how the Germans, once the Russians surrendered in World War I, kept going until Lenin and the new regime signed the peace treaty and gave up all the land and backed off. And that would have worked for Iraq. If we kept going without fighting, he would have been gone, and there would have been a new order immediately.
I think so, and I think what people have to understand is that Iraqi major did not ask us to dismantle his country, to dismantle his army, his police, to effectively challenge his culture and occupy his country with foreigners. He simply wanted us to rid his country of the menace, and that was Saddam Hussein and a small number of people who were in charge at the top. And we could have done that without occupying Iraq. Indeed, there would have been some extended conflict in the country, but you would still have had remnants of the army, remnants of the administration, and ultimately I think you would have seen a new government emerge, and that government would have been willing to work with us. Unfortunately, no one thought in those terms. I think people thought in terms of, well, in order to affect change, we have to control every inch of Iraq. We have to occupy the whole place. And, of course, that was always a recipe for disaster because Muslim Arabs simply don't want large numbers of Christian Europeans in U.S. and British uniform in their country.
We have about a minute, Doug. You referenced Tora Bora, same failure of decision in the command level to go ahead and get bin Laden.
Well, listen, it was inexcusable. When we went in November, we had one clear, unambiguous mission, much as we'd had in 1991, and that was get Osama bin Laden, his inner circle, the top leadership of al-Qaeda. We had many opportunities to do that.
And there we were in December, January of 2001, 2002, and we let him get away.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, no one in uniform, and it's the generals in uniform who are ultimately responsible, have ever been held accountable.
Douglas Macgregor, the book is Warrior's Rage, The Great Tank Battle of 73 Easting. In here, the actions of 7th Cavalry, 26, 27, and 28 of February. That is the story of the catastrophe of the Bush administration and the ongoing puzzle of Iraq, Iran, and the Middle East. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show.